My fingers trembled as the door slammed behind me. The house still echoed with the shout, "Get out and don't come back." I didn't argue. For 3 years I'd been paying their mortgage in secret, saving the walls where I'd been humiliated. And now I was left on the street. My name is Sophia, I'm 32. I'm a financial advisor, I live in Boston, and I'm used to keeping other people's crises under control. But my own home has always been a battleground. My mother with her impeccable smile and me, always falling short of her standards. Even the calmest evenings felt cracked, as if a new blow was about to strike. If you've ever had the feeling that family breaks harder than strangers, stay with me. Write in the comments where you are now, and how you deal with the pressures of loved ones. Subscribe if you're close to the topic of boundaries. Trust me, you'll be interested to hear how it all turned out. From the first moment in the house, my breath seemed to stick in the air, as if the walls themselves were whispering, "Be careful." Mom sat at the dining room table, her fingernail tapping on the porcelain like a metronome for my mistakes. Nearby, Dad slouched, eyes hidden behind the newspaper, but I could see him tensing his fingers on the edge of the page, ready to smooth out another storm. Rachel never brought home a bee. Mom slid her gaze over me like a knife. I swallowed, the dryness in my mouth preventing me from answering. Dad coughed and muttered, "Honey, Sophia's trying." But his words dissolved into thin air as quickly as steam over soup. In the middle of the evening I wanted to disappear, to become a small scratch on the wallpaper next to the door. Brother Daniel had long since left for college, and now comparisons were my only conversation partner. When I would bring praise to a teacher, Mom would find a shadow. Rachel knew 3 languages at your age. I clenched my fists under the table, my fingernails leaving red crescents on my palms. Sometimes my father would peek into my room whispering, "She's just worried about you," and I pretended to believe it. But even his warm "everything's going to be okay" sounded like a promise no one was going to keep. As the night wore on, the room felt tighter, and I learned to fall asleep as if I were balancing on the edge of the glass floor. I didn't know yet that this feeling would become my eternal companion. The first time I felt excitement was when I held the economics textbook my teacher had given me. The pages smelled of printing ink and freedom. Numbers folded into stories, formulas became a map by which I could get outside my mom's rules. But at home the word finance sounded like a challenge. "A woman in banks? Don't make me laugh," Mom quipped, adjusting the tablecloth. I stared at her perfectly aligned plates and realized, any dream that didn't fit into her served world would be shattered on the porcelain. In the middle of a lonely night, I turned on the desk lamp and practiced solving investment problems like it was a cipher from another life. My shoulders were aching from exertion, my heart thudding in my throat as I filled out university application forms. Cornell, Stanford, a few backup colleges, they were all my secret doors to the outside. "You're applying to medical school, right?" Dad asked one day, peering cautiously into the room. "I'm thinking about it for now," I lied, hiding the thick application envelope under my notebook. His gaze lingered longer than usual, but it didn't give me away. As dawn approached, I was putting stamps on the envelopes, my hands shaking as if I were signing not papers but my own release. I dropped them into the mailbox on the street corner, and the metal clank of the lid echoed in my chest. That secret was my first real step toward freedom. My first day at Cornell smelled of freedom, the freshly cut grass on campus, and the new leather of my student notebook. I walked down the walkway between the red brick towers and felt my shoulders straighten, like I could breathe in full for the first time. Here no one compared me to Rachel and Daniel. Here equations and projects spoke louder than parental rebukes. The first months were a mad rush. Lectures, part-time work in the library, evenings spent on graphs and models. Sometimes my fingers went numb from the constant typing of formulas on my laptop, but it was in those numbers that I found peace. I could see the future I was adding up on my own like a balance sheet. "You chose Cornell? Why not Harvard?" Mom's voice on the phone rang cold like a spoon against glass. I bit my lip to keep from saying Harvard had rejected my application. "I'm happy with my choice," I replied, and I heard her sigh long and heavy. By mid-study, I had my first clients through my internship. Retirees who trusted me with their savings. As they shook my hand, their palms trembled with age and mine with responsibility. I was growing in the eyes of the professors, but at home these victories turned to dust. "Sophia works with money," My mother introduced me at dinners, as if I collected coins for fun. My father smiled guiltily but kept silent. And every time I returned to my childhood bedroom with its lavender walls, I felt success dissolve into their shadows. But even my victories at home sounded like defeats. The weeknight phone call cut through the air, and my father's voice sounded so quiet, as if each word was given with effort. Sophia. I was downsized today. The pause was longer than the phrase itself. I pressed the receiver to my ear, my fingers numb. For the first time, his confidence broke like thin glass. When I got home, my mother greeted me in a silk robe, as if the news of unemployment didn't concern her. She cut off a piece of apple pie and said, "We won't change our habits. People will notice." The crystal glasses sparkled on the dining room table, and the streetlights dimmed outside the window. The contrast was painful. Her father sat beside her, slumping his shoulders. His hand slid across the wooden surface of the table, as if he were searching for an invisible support. "We'll get through this," he squeezed out. But his eyes betrayed something else. Fear, shame, exhaustion. I felt a knot grow in my chest, and I could barely swallow my tea, my tongue sticking to my palate. In the middle of the conversation, Mom stuck to her guns. "The house isn't for sale." I'm not backing down one step. I looked at her rings, shining in the light of the lamp, and thought they were the anchor pulling the family down. The words about work she brushed aside. "At my age, no one will take it." And then, "What will I look like?" "Mom, but the loan." I started, but she interrupted. "Stop. We don't discuss that in front of guests." I blinked. That meant I was a guest too. My father looked away, and I realized there was no point in arguing. Near midnight I found him in the kitchen, among the bills and empty mugs, his hands shaking more than a teaspoon in a glass. I didn't yet know that this evening at the kitchen table would change everything. The credit letters lay on the kitchen table like a sentence, and for the first time I felt I had to intervene. Dad sat with his hands in his hands, his tea cooling beside him, a brown film rippling on its surface. Mother walked past, tossing, "Sort it out yourself, Thomas," and the sound of her heels dissolved into the hallway. I returned to the city and opened my laptop that evening. My heart pounded in my temples as I entered my bank details and connected the automatic payment. $2,200 every month, a figure that would henceforth be a reminder of my hidden victim. My finger hovered over the confirm button, and my chest tightened, as if I were signing a contract with myself. "You don't have to," I whispered to my reflection in the black screen, but the cursor blinked, demanding a decision. With a click of the mouse, my life split into a before and after. I tucked the statement into a folder with the impersonal name utility, as if that could protect me from prying eyes. Midweek, I noticed habitual purchases becoming luxuries. A new raincoat put off, travel turned into dreams. I smiled at clients, urged them to trust the numbers, and sat with a calculator in the evenings, crossing out lines from my own budget. No one knew. My mother kept buying designer tablecloths, my father assured me he was moonlighting as a consultant, and I lived with this secret contract. Closer to bed at night, I listened to the ticking of the clock and thought that each tick took another dollar out of my life. I had chosen silence, and with it I had signed my sentence. Every visit home turned into an exam, and again I tried to pass it with gifts. A cashmere scarf in her favorite shade of sky blue, a rare edition book, a dinner at a restaurant where the whiteness of the tablecloths dazzled my eyes. Mom accepted everything with a squint, as if testing the authenticity of my generosity. "It's too prickly," she quipped about the scarf, and the fabric in my hands was suddenly as heavy as stone. I kept playing this game, hoping to snatch even a crumb of warmth. But in the middle of each evening her lines fell like cold drops. "Why spend money on nonsense? Who taught you that?" I smiled, though my fingers under the table trembled and left crescent moons on my palms. My father pretended to consider a glass of wine, only to stay out of it. After these meetings, I'd go back to town and hide my face in my pillow, gulping air as if I were swimming out of the depths. Emily noticed the change immediately. "You're pale again, like you left all your energy there." I waved it off, "I'm just tired." But my eyes gave away more than words. One day we were sitting in her kitchen with a glass of wine, and she suddenly said, "You call it caring, but I see you fading away." "It's not caring, Sophia, it's sacrifice." The word rang like a bell and the air in the room became viscous. But then one day I heard it for the first time. It's not caring, it's sacrifice. Every Sunday in church, the words "honor your father and mother" sounded not like a commandment, but like a sentence. The pastor said them with a smile, but my back went cold, as if the phrase was addressed to me personally. People around me nodded, and it seemed like the whole room knew. A disobedient daughter is the worst sin of all. After the service, the women exchanged recipes and gossip, and during breaks they threw glances. "Sophia, you go to your parents' house a lot, don't you?" a neighbor asked, and her tone sounded more like validation than interest. I clutched my bag so tightly that the strap dug into my palm and replied, "Of course." The lie rose a lump in my throat, but no one noticed. At home, Mom used those words as a weapon. "God says to obey your parents," she said as she served a plate of fried chicken. Dad remained silent, as if blessing her with tacit agreement. By the middle of dinner, I felt as if the walls themselves were eavesdropping and would testify against me if I dared to object. Sometimes I imagine what it would be like to leave, to put up a boundary, but in our town that amounted to banishment. He who turns his back on his family has turned his back on God. They used to say at neighborhood meetings. Those words cut deeper into me than any of my mother's criticisms. Toward nightfall, I lay awake and wondered if maybe I was the sinner they were waiting to expose. In our town, the worst sin is to put yourself first. I entered the house too quietly and froze in the hallway when I heard voices from the kitchen. The paper dinner bag was cutting my fingers, but I couldn't move. Mom spoke sharply. "She thinks we need her handouts. Little Miss Perfect." Dad replied in a tired whisper, "Sophia just wants to help." I felt the skin on the back of my neck get covered in goosebumps. Every word Mom said fell like a stone into a well, and the bottom in me echoed with a rumble. I didn't dare go in, just turned around, trying not to let the doors creak open. In the car, the pasta packet was cold, and the smell of tomato sauce seemed to mock my naivete. "Everything okay?" Emily asked on the phone when I called her later. "Yeah, just tired," I lied, wiping away tears with the back of my hand. For a second I thought she heard the silence between the words anyway. That night I lay on the bed, my hands clasped together so tightly that my joints turned white, and repeated to myself, "Next time I won't be silent." But my chest clenched tighter and tighter, and it felt like my parents' house was pulling me back like a magnet. The clock on the nightstand ticked, the hands counting down the seconds until the next meeting, and I clung to that promise like a lifeline. But the next time was closer than I thought. I held the little blue box in my hands, and my fingers trembled so much that the ribbon seemed alive. It was the Rolex my father had once dreamed of as a joke, leafing through magazines. I'd been saving up for months, hoping to see a glimmer of joy in his eyes. When he opened the box, the air in the room shook. "Sophia." "It's too much," his voice trailed off, but his smile betrayed delight. Mom instantly tensed, and her gaze cut me like a knife. "How much did it cost?" she asked. "We're counting every penny, and you're frittering away money." My father hastily adjusted his cuff, hiding the glow of the watch, but the silence at the table had become unbearable. I talked myself out of answering, chewing the meat that was turning to dust in my mouth. "You didn't have to," he repeated, but his eyes still glittered. Mom, on the other hand, spoke louder and louder, and in her tone was an indictment not just of the price of the gift, but of my very independence. Dad poured himself wine too quickly, as if he wanted to drown the conversation in the glass. "Your gesture only emphasizes our vulnerability." Her words hit my nerves like hammers. I glanced at the watch in his hands and thought it was the one that would be the new reason for war. Panic was growing inside me. The holiday that was supposed to be a light was turning into a swath of shadow. The holiday was turning into a trap. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the whisper of voices behind the half-open door. I froze at the table, my cup still full, my heart thundering in my chest. My father spoke in a tired tone. "The cards are blank, taxes hang over us." Mom interrupted sharply. "Don't you dare tell her. She's just waiting to prove we're insolvent." I took a step back, my fingers clutching the edge of the table as if it were my only support. My mother's words fell like cold needles, each one sinking deeper into me. The thought swirled in my head. They were drowning, and I was the only one who could cast a circle. But in their eyes, my lap is a stone. Pulling myself together, I stepped in. I heard everything. My voice treacherously shook. My mother turned pale, my father lowered his eyes. I tried to breathe steady, but everything clenched in my chest. Let me help make a plan, I continued. That's my job. Mom grinned sharply, fury flashed in her gaze. You think we're kids who need control? Dad raised his hands as if he wanted to calm the storm, but he remained silent. I talked about the budget, about refinancing, while I felt my fingers go numb with tension. Suddenly, in the silence, her voice, sharp as cracking glass, sounded. You're not a rescuer, Sophia. You're an accuser. The words hit harder than if she had slapped my cheek. I didn't realize my words would be the spark for a fire. She rose from the table so abruptly that the chair fell to the floor with a clatter. The veins in her neck tightened, and her face turned purple. You always thought you were above us. Mom's voice tore the air. We gave you everything, and you pay us with contempt. My father sat without looking up, his fingers rubbing the handle of the cup as if his life depended on it. I felt my body clench traitorously, my shoulders rising to my ears, but the words inside burned and demanded an outlet. You call that caring? I looked up. Years of criticizing, comparing, rebuking my every move. Mom stepped closer, her breath hot and sharp. Ungrateful. I sacrificed everything for you and you. Something snapped in my chest like a cracked string, and I suddenly heard my own voice louder than hers. No, you sacrifice for image, for appearing to be the perfect mistress. But I'm not a project you can rewrite to your own plan. Her father whispered, Sophia, please. But his voice dissolved into the storm. I felt my hands tremble, but I didn't look away. The words came off on their own, cutting the air. Enough. I won't accept your rules anymore. And then I said it for the first time. Enough. Her voice hit harder than any slap. Go away and don't come back. The air in the kitchen became viscous like syrup and I almost choked. My father whispered something, but his words were drowned out by the roar of her fury. I looked at them and couldn't believe it. The same people who had called me daughter were now casting me out as a stranger. I stood up, my knees trembling so that my steps were labored. A dry ache throbbed in my chest, as if my heart had become a piece of glass. My father raised his hand as if he wanted to stop me. Sophia. Let her cool down. But there was no defense in his gaze, just tired helplessness. I walked up the stairs, packing, and every detail of the room clung. The trophies on the shelf, the old plaid, the framed photos. Everything seemed foreign. My fingers slid along the zipper of my suitcase, and I caught myself thinking I wasn't packing, but the remnants of myself. On the descent, I saw my mother turn away from the window, unwilling to even look at me. Dad stood next to me, but remained silent. Is this really what you want? I asked into the void. The answer was silence. I picked up my bag, and the skin on my palm sweated from the heaviness. The doorknob was icy cold, as if testing my resolve. I closed the door and with it an entire era. The steering wheel cut into my palms, as if the metal knew I wasn't coming back. The road ahead flickered with blurry lights, but my eyes clung to the mirror where the house still stood, heavy and indifferent, as if pushing me away. The clutch rattled under my foot, and the shivering in my chest turned into a rumbling, empty bell. The phone lit up on the passenger seat. Emily. I didn't want to pick it up, but my finger slid across the screen on its own. Are you home? Her voice was soft, but I could hear the fear in it. I sucked in air, my lips trembling. No, I'm in the car. She told me to leave. Forever. The silence on the line was longer than the road. Then a rustle and a quick answer. Wait. I'll be there. You won't be alone. Those words hit me harder than my mother's scream. I suddenly realized that the sky hadn't collapsed, but something inside had cracked irreversibly. My eyes watered, the world blurred, and tears ran in hot streaks. I didn't try to stop them. My shoulders shuddered, my breathing ragged. The car had become a small chamber where it was finally safe to break down. I covered my face with my hands and allowed myself what I had forbidden myself for years. Weakness. But the tears were only the beginning. The laptop keys clicked and my heart pounded harder than any notification. I opened the banking app and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't see a debit in favor of their house. My finger hovered over the cancel autopay button, and a wave rose in my chest, a mixture of fear and relief. I clicked, and the silence after that click sounded louder than any mother's scream. In the kitchen, Emily put the kettle on, and her voice cut through my thoughts. Do you realize how much freedom you've just bought yourself? I nodded, though the word traitor still rang in my head. I was used to saving them at the cost of my future. Now I had to save at least myself. I spread out the papers on the table. Statements, plans, calculations. For the first time, these schedules weren't about other people's debts but about my dreams. The amount I was spending on their mortgage could turn into a down payment. I allowed myself to open the listing website and whisper aloud, "My house." My lips quivered when I saw a photo of an apartment with tall windows and wood floors. It didn't scream luxury, but it breathed security. For the first time, I wasn't paying for someone else's roof but my own. Dr. Carter's office smelled like lavender, but a storm raged inside me. I sat with my fingers clenched so tightly my knuckles turned white, and I didn't know where to begin. She was silent, giving me time, and that silence was louder than any question. "You're describing a cycle," she finally said, looking softly into my eyes. I blinked. "What cycle?" My voice shook. Criticism, outburst, temporary truce. And back in a circle again. It's a classic abusive pattern. Her words lay heavy, but also relieved me of the perpetual, "Maybe it's my fault." I swallowed, my throat dry as sandpaper. "But she's not always bad," I blurted out. Dr. Carter nodded. "Exactly. Those rare moments of warmth keep you inside the cycle. You expect change, but the system never changes without rigid boundaries." The word boundaries burned like it was foreign. I remembered my mother laughing when I tried to say no. My lips trembled, but I squeezed it out. "I'm afraid that if I set boundaries, I'll lose them altogether," she replied firmly. "If you don't set them, you'll lose yourself." And in that moment I realized that for the first time in my life, I was learning to breathe freely. My phone rang at the worst possible moment, and I already knew whose number was on the screen. My heart sank into my heels, my palms instantly sweating. I stalled for time, watching the call vibrate across the desk as if demanding an answer. "Heidi." Dad's voice sounded deliberately calm. I pressed my lips together painfully. "We miss you," he said, as if in between. That "we" hung heavy in the air. I could only hear his voice, but it was always her behind him. I stayed silent, swallowing the lump in my throat. "You okay? Work, everything okay?" He tried to hold in safe questions, but his pauses were longer than words, and his mother's silence behind him was louder than any rebuke. I closed my eyes, and in that pause I felt my shoulders tighten to the point of pain. I wanted to ask, "What's she saying?" But I couldn't speak. Instead I quietly said, "Are you bored or are you?" He fell silent, coughing, and I knew the answer was too dangerous to say out loud. But behind the soft words was the real question. The words came out before I could stop them. "I've been paying for your house for 3 years." The silence on the line became resounding, like the whole world was holding its breath. I could feel my palms sticking to the phone. My shoulders squared as if trying to hide me from my own confession. "What?" My father's voice shook like an old string snapped. I gritted my teeth. "Every month, Father. Automatic payments. I'm the one who kept the roof over your heads." The words sounded dry, almost mechanical, but inside me everything trembled like a taut rope. He coughed and the pause lingered. "Sophia, why?" We didn't know." I closed my eyes, feeling sticky sweat roll down my back. "Because you would have said no. Or Mom would have turned it into an excuse to blame me. And I couldn't watch you drown." In the middle of the conversation I heard his sobbing, barely audible, in the tube. "You took it all on yourself, girl." His voice trailed off, and I realized that for the first time he was seeing me not as a daughter, but as a savior. But there was so much pain in that admission that my throat constricted. I stood at the window, the street lights twinkling, but everything inside me was sinking into darkness. There was nothing to hide now. The cafe on the corner smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread, but everything inside me was in a tight knot. I sat by the window, my fingers fiddling with a paper napkin as I waited for my father. I recognized his footsteps immediately, slow, heavy, as if every second added to his age. He sat down across from me, resting his hands on the table, and I noticed them trembling. "Sophia, I keep thinking about what you said," he began, avoiding my gaze. His voice was soft, but there was desperation behind it. "You didn't have to carry that alone." I bit my lip, tasting the brackish taste of blood. Words of encouragement from him came so late in the day that they were no longer healing. We were silent for longer than we spoke, and in that pause I suddenly caught a familiar scent, my mother's perfume. In the middle of my father's sentence, there was the sound of heels behind me, and she came to the table. Her face was a flawless mask, her lips in a thin smile. "Of course, secret meetings behind my back," she said as if we were discussing a trifle. My father flinched, eyes darting from me to her like a man cornered. I wanted to get up, but my body felt like it had grown into the chair. "We were talking about debts," he said hurriedly. She sat down next to him, putting her hand on his shoulder. "Oh, I'm sure Sophia would have found a way to make it into a play." Her words whipped around like a slap. And in that instant I realized I had been put in front of a choice again. I'd never seen her eyes glisten with tears before, and that stunned me more than the screaming. My mom sat across from me, hands clasped together, lips trembling. "You've always been stronger than me, Sophia," she said in a hoarse voice. My chest tightened, but I didn't answer right away. Her shoulders looked for the first time not like armor, but like a weight she could no longer carry. She sobbed. "I was jealous. Your courage, your freedom. I lived my life afraid of other people's judgment, and I made you hostage to my fears." My father was silent, staring out the window, as if afraid to break the fragile pause. I felt my palms sweat, my breathing becoming harsh. "You could have said that earlier," I blurted out. She nodded, tears glistening on her cheeks. Mid-conversation her voice trailed off. "I don't know how to be a mother to you the way you are, but I want to try." Those words sounded so awkward and sincere that my mouth went dry. I realized for the first time she was admitting her own limits and failures. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders and said, "Let's try. But now by my rules. I won't let you destroy what I'm building." Something new flashed in her gaze, either respect or fear. I gave it a chance, but on my terms. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of my apartment, and the cat's soft purr became my new alarm clock. She nestled on my chest, warm and calm, and I smiled. Now the morning didn't start with phone calls or complaints. It belonged to me alone. The kettle was boiling in the kitchen, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the space. I ran my hand across the wooden table, knowing, for the first time in a long time, this was my house, bought by me without other people's demands or debts. Every crack in the parquet felt like a personal trophy of freedom. Sometimes my father called. His voice became softer, more often asking, "How are you?" rather than "What did you do?" Mom rarely engaged in conversation, but even her silence became different, less prickly, as if she were learning to breathe with me. I was noticing the change, small but real, and for the first time it wasn't manipulative. In the evening I lit a candle and opened a book, the cat curled up in a ball at my feet. Life was still challenging, but now I knew the value of my boundaries. Freedom turned out not to be a loud victory, but a quiet, steady breath in my own room. Could you put a stop to it for a new chapter?